So we're gonna do a poem from our second book, Historian DeLorean, featuring the DeLorean from Back to the Future, and
The original.
yeah. So the first book of poems I made was called Holy Roller, and the subtitle is Poems on Keeping Your Faith While Being In on the Joke, and I love that title because that's kind of what I do with my whole religious studies, ancient literature PhD. Is like I hold it loosely and not too tightly, and I feel like blessed is the one who's in on the joke. Like gets that it's a giant discussion that happens over time. It's not one thing or one statement. It's more like a buckshot of ideas about God stitched into one tradition, and whereas people can get very impassioned and even argumentative about biblical literature, scholars always hold it really loosely, and they're okay with the disparity of it all.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But this second book is kind of about my armchair interest in astronomy and physics, and to me, the fascinating thing about ancient traditions is when they're ahead of the curve trying to name God in ways that seem to bear out later in physics. And it's like a lot of times art is ahead of the scientist. Right. Like the artist perceives something and then science and technology catches up to it.
Like on Star Trek in the 60s, there was a universal translator that now they have.
ChatGPT?
Is that what it is?
I don't know what they called it.
Sorry.
Or Google Translate?
Yeah, Google. Yeah, one of those. Yeah. That was in the Captain Kirk and those guys had it first. Spock and Lieutenant Uhura. Sorry.
Yeah. I love Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that show is so full of huge ideas, and each episode has a important piece of the human conversation.
Right.
Pretty solid.
Yeah.
The fight scenes could be better.
The fight scenes could be better. Yeah.
So this one's called Awareness, though, and it's about the thread that runs through all sorts of wisdom literature, ancient and modern, that the fascinating thing about what it is to be human is that we have some awareness that comes from somewhere. I mean, think about it. Every experiment ever done in science to empirically prove something is only possible because we can perceive it. And there's a mind behind our eye that is seeing the experiment, seeing the results, and processing that.
Yeah.
And what wisdom traditions go back to over and over again is asking, well, where does that awareness come from? And they argue it's reliant on God, like the energy or the source that makes everything go is what animates the human soul and has us, ask questions, have memories. I mean, our body's cells replace themselves every 7 years, so that we're technically composed of completely different stuff every 7 years, and yet we have memories of what it's like to be 7 or 14 or 21. I mean, how far out is that, right?
Wow,
yeah. And I feel like I've seen this before as an ancient scholar, where in the Hellenistic era, all of the philosophical schools were materialist. That is, ultimately, whatever's physical is what is, right?
Okay, yeah.
Whether you were a Stoic or an Epicurean or a Cynic, you tended to just perceive the material world and speculate about the soul, but say, yeah, who knows? But in the first century, there's this great shift where the transcendent gets reclaimed. The idea that some being or energy or power that makes it all go, there's a huge interest in it again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the big question they're asking is, well, where does the soul come from? Where does awareness come from? Why is it that I can ask questions? And you'll see in this poem that I talk about it from the standpoint of physics and astronomy, but then I lace back into it biblical literature that seems to be asking the same question.
Yeah.
What is the I when I say I think, right?
Right, yeah.
So here's the poem. It says,
okay.
Awareness is the first and greatest gift of God. Look, traveler, in an age that worships intellectual knowing, be mindful of the primal gift of awareness, constantly observing the empirical evidence in the first place. What is the I that thinks and feels?
Yeah.
You can thank Rene Descartes for the idea's expression, or think of Yahweh's words to Moshe, or recall Jesus' allusion to that same theophany. All are naming existence before any other discernible fact. Awareness is the means you have for observing. No experiment is possible without the observing eye. No observation of tree line or big sky comes without center of self and mystic intuition under the mind. All this is theoretical and heady, but think of the implications when you actually eat the spaghetti. Who says you are old or young? Who says you've been here only this long? Who says when you leave you're ever actually gone? Who says where awareness goes when the body expires? And who says I have this short time and so make the best of it? Who says there's no such thing as a silver thread? God says the answer to all these questions, but is not interested to spoil the surprise. Instead, God provides and sustains your awareness so you can marvel, wonder, and take in the dawn. If you are an enlightened one, Obi-Wan, you have realized the absurdity of assumed finality. You wonder how you came to the house of the world and how many times and where you might go next. And now when you read Bereshit's in the beginning, you ask with the rabbis, well, which beginning? And you laugh. Your cosmology and individuality dances with the idea that awareness is the first heavenly light, a star factory divided into a billion souls across the ages.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So real quick, like the highlights on that one.
Okay.
So we start by talking about that in an age of intellectual knowing, like nothing's more important in the modern world than being able to prove something, cite your source, and show another person they're wrong, right? But I'm arguing actually your awareness is the primal gift that comes from divinity, and it's the only reason you can reason in the first place. And then I talk about how in philosophy, Rene Descartes is the first one to say, I think, therefore I am, right? Like, because I'm aware and I have thoughts, I know that I actually exist, right? But then I say, or you can think of Yahweh's words to Moshe when he tells Moses, you know, Moses says, what's your name to God? And he's trying to be able to control divinity. Like, if you can name a spirit, you can control it. And God just says, I am what I am. Right? And
Popeye said that too.
And Jesus says the same thing. When the Pharisees ask him who he is, he just says, I am. And what he's doing is he's hooking back into the text they know so well. And he's saying, I'm that being.
Yeah.
So how about them apples?
How about them apples?
And then, all these sources are claiming awareness before any other discernible facts. Like, I know I'm aware. And it means that before you can run any experiment, you have an observing eye that comes from somewhere, and you don't know where it came from, and you don't know where it goes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There's some kind of, Plato would say, rotation of souls somewhere that goes in and out of bodies here. You don't know where they come from, or where they go, or whether they go to the universe bubble next door, or to the one next to that.
Yeah.
You know, whether you pop into another bubble in the bath, you don't have any idea, right? And so,
Sorry.
That's right. Souls float in and out of the world like Mary Poppins, motherfucker. And so all this, I'll edit that out. And so,
I don't know. Sometimes you need to shock people, man,
yeah,
don't you?
I think I do.
I think I do.
And so, and then, so what I've tried to do is make a giant mess of showing you that everything you know is predicated on some ability to know being given to you from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Some reliance on something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say, yeah, this is all theoretical and heady, but think of the implications when you actually eat the spaghetti, right? Proof's in the pudding.
Right.
And so then I have this series of questions about assumptions that we can never, in my belief, really know the answers to.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite quotes from philosophy is when Soren Kierkegaard says, the things that are most impossible to prove are the first things to become dogma in groups of collective thinkers. Whether it's a church or a synagogue or a school of philosophy, the thing that's the most impossible to prove, people will repeat over and over again as a fact. You know?
Right.
People say I have huge hands. The things that get repeated over and over and over can become true, but then when you step back and say, how do we really know that? A lot of times we don't.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times your hands look small.
I
don't know.
But
yeah, but like think of these questions. How do you really know the answers to this?
Right.
Who says you're old or young? You're like
right.
As an earthling, I'm middle aged. How many times have I been here or anywhere that I can remember or not remember?
Yeah.
How long will I go on?
Mm-hmm.
I think I die at 80. What if I go somewhere else and live on, and then I'm like seconds old?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So like these things we assume we know, we don't. Who says you've only been here this long? Who says when you leave you're ever really gone? Who says awareness goes when the body expires? Who says you have this little short time, so make the best of it? I'll never forget when my grandma died. I had this really cool grandma that was like 4 inches shorter than me and like a really good point guard, which is hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah. She literally played basketball when they took real granny shots.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And
also,
I'll never forget when she died. I was kind of messed up from it. It was the first time as a kid that I'd ever had a family member die. And I was trying to process like what that meant and what that happened. And there was this old physics philosopher who went to my church as a kid, and I don't know if he could just perceive that I wasn't doing well or knew that I'd been through something traumatic, but he just pulled me aside and said, like, you know, we say in physics that a world where your grandma's alive and playing basketball again could be as close as the tip of your nose and you wouldn't perceive it. And he was talking about like basic string theory, but he was saying don't just assume that all your perceptions are correct.
Right.
And don't just assume that your grandma's gone, forever gone. Like, you have no idea.
Right.
Like none of us really have any idea.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And, you know, the writer of Ecclesiastes says that Yahweh put eternity in the human heart. There's something in us that says a finite life isn't enough and it has to go on, and we know it. I mean, we have all these constructs of heaven or Sheol or the afterlife or, you know, speculations about whether we go to another dimension or whether we're reborn as a person again or reborn as an animal again, or all these speculations come from that observation that there's some part of our heart that has eternity in its mind. You know?
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget, he just pulled me aside and was like, you don't know what you think you know.
Yeah.
It could be okay in lots of ways.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
And so I say ultimately, God, energy, source, being, animation, says the answers to all these questions, not us. We don't get to decide. We just get to live as creatures in this time and decide what to do with that time. But God, whatever God is not interested to spoil the surprise. So,
surprise.
Yeah. So if you're an enlightened one, you realize the absurdity of assuming you know anything about these questions.
Exactly.
And instead, you don't know why you came to the house of the world and where you're going next and where you came from before you got here. Mm-hmm. And now when you read in the beginning, you ask with the rabbis, which beginning? One of the most famous commentaries on the first book of the Bible, like the first stitch of poetry in the Bible, Bereshit, in the beginning, is a rabbi that quips, well, which beginning?
Which beginning?
Like you don't know.
Right.
You don't know this is the first go around.
Right, exactly. Well, you know, I'm pretty sure this is either the third or the fourth sequel because it's terrible.
That's my favorite dad joke in a while. All right, let's see what we get. Let's see what we get with this one. Awareness is the first and greatest gift of God. Look, traveler, in an age that worships intellectual knowing, be mindful of the primal gifts of awareness, constantly showing the empirical evidence in the first place. What is the I that thinks and feels? You can thank Rene Descartes for the idea's first expression, or think of Yahweh's words to Moshe, or recall Jesus' allusion to the same theophany. All are naming existence before any other discernible fact. Awareness is the means you have for observing. No experiment is possible without the observing eye. No observation of tree line or big sky comes without the center of self and mystic intuition under the mind. All of this is theoretical and heady, but think of the implications when you actually taste the spaghetti. Who says you're young and old? Who says you've been here only this long? Who says that when you leave you're ever really gone? Who says where awareness goes when the body expires? And who says you have this short time, so make the best of it? Who says there's no such thing as a silver thread through it all? God says the answers to all these questions, but is not interested to spoil the surprise. Instead, God provides and sustains your awareness so you can marvel, wonder, and take in the dawn. If you're an enlightened one, Obi-Wan, you have realized the absurdity of assumed finality, and you wonder how you came to be in the house of the world, and how many times and where you might go next. And now when you read Bereshit, in the beginning, you ask with the rabbis, which beginning? And laugh. Your cosmology and individuality dances with the idea that awareness is the first heavenly light, a star factory divided into a billion souls across the ages. That was awesome. That was the greatest and best cover-up in the world, too.
Yeah.
We ended it at a different time. This is why I can always perform live with you. I have no fear.
No fear?
Just get it done.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Awesome.
So today we did like 2 episodes. One was having peace in this temporal moment of insanity, and the second one was almost like grounding in just how big and universal it all is, and how few answers we actually have.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully these episodes help, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Put comfortable, peaceful people and things around you. Seek peace. And it will be automatic eventually. You won't have to try so hard.
Yeah.
Be good to each other.
Right on. Is that enough for today?
Yeah.